So again, in the news cycle, guess what? One of those lies we tell ourselves that individuals are the people who drive open source. And the answer is not really. It turns out, that this week there was a study that was released again on, where the contributions are coming from in the open source space. And no surprise here, but it is big companies, right? And the articles that have come out, and this is just one, there were several. This one's from the Register, but there were several who kind of picked up on this theme. This is not a surprise, right? Like, to me.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
The fact that, big tech and big companies are contributing to open source has been happening for quite a while. And in fact, there has been a concerted effort to hire as many open source developers for certain projects onto your team to lend credibility to your offerings. Right?
Totally.
So in the Postgres space, there's a war that happens between Google, Microsoft, AWS, and others to see who can get the most contributors to Postgres on their team. Because he who controls the contributors controls the destiny of the project.
It's true.
Right?
It's absolutely true.
And so, it's weird, and it's saddening in some cases because, open source was, everybody considers it like, it's geek led, it's led by, those who are contributing, and certainly while you can go out there and put contributions out there, there's no guarantee that they will be accepted or that you will become a top contributor there. There is a lot of clout that these companies have. And as we go back to last week's episode where we talked about layoffs, there was this theory that open source was hit harder in the layoffs. And it could just be because these big companies were hit hard with the layoffs.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, the big companies have the most to cut. They have probably the most striation between things that directly impact the bottom line versus things that indirectly impact the bottom line. And open source, unfortunately, is one of those more indirect ones. Often, not always, but often. But I think that, especially for this article, when we're talking about Linux, I think that anyone who has been to any Linux Foundation conference in their life probably knows that it is a very, there's a lot of corporate involvement.
So just an FYI, the article is titled Linux, but honestly, the study isn't specific to Linux.
Right. Totally. Absolutely. I mean, there's one other thing that, someone might be inclined to say, which is like, yeah, sure, Google contributes a lot to open source, but at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of people who are writing and committing code. But right. Google's the one paying their salary when they do that. And I think that just the sheer number of engineers that work at these companies, of course, these companies are the biggest contributors to open source. They have the most engineers, and engineers are the ones doing this stuff. And so, to me, this stuff is super obvious. But I think that we like to pretend it's not the case. I think a lot of the time,
right? But so we're getting shaken to our core here, right? Because it's like our beliefs around open source being this very community focused thing. While there is a great community around it. And it's driven completely by the community. It's more and more on the corporate side that there is more and more influence. When you look at, boards for foundations, you look at the donations for projects, it's driven by these larger corporations. And there tends to be a lot more emphasis on things that matter to those organizations because of that.
Totally. I mean, I think another way to look at it is just that these companies are kind of the biggest benefactors of open source as well. And so, as you become more and more of a stakeholder in it, you become more and more involved, and you're going to drive the community forward however you can in a way that fits your interests.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I hope that we will see more and more studies like that Linux Foundation one, hopefully ones that are, I think, less survey based and a little bit more kind of data driven in terms of what's actually.
We're gonna do a survey, Avi. We're gonna do a survey,
and it's we may, but we also have a lot of. Yes. However, we also have a lot of other data that's not survey self-reported that I think also gives a lot of information on things like economic impact of open source, which is huge. It's huge.